Good morning to you all on this November the 1st. So, Halloween festivities, for those who celebrate, are over with last night. And for pagans in Ireland, that's not the Samhain cross quarter day. So, there's two separate festivals. So, just to be clear about it, there's Halloween, which people are very familiar with, on October 31st. And in Irish folk tradition, our kind of predecessors, our ancestors in the last number of hundred years will have celebrated this as a Christianized festival of the dead, our beloved departed and the ancestors. And there were so many, traditions that as a 60-year-old, so I'm going back to 50 years ago, in my childhood, things like bobbing for apples, things like the apple hanging from a string from a rafter in the home or in a shed, or in our case it was the garage off the kitchen where our washing machine and bits and pieces, but there was a wooden beam, and my dad would always hang an apple on a string from there, and we'd have to keep our hands behind our back and try and get a bite of the apple as it was swinging around. Things like essentially divination, although my parents wouldn't have called it that, but staring into the fire and seeing what you would see in the flames, and peeling an apple, and if you get ideally a long string of peel that you throw over your shoulder and see what letter it forms, and it's supposed to be the initial of your true love. So lots of those traditions, are part of living tradition in Ireland, although they are not part of a pagan practice as such. They're incorporated into practice by people who are pagan, like myself. So we have like two distinct celebrations. One is Halloween. So Halloween is from Eve of All Hallows, so a Christian festival of the dead. We have All Souls and we have All Saints. So today, the 1st of November, would be a Christian festival as well. And so I think, there's a whole debate that rages on that comes up every year. When is Samhain? And, for a long time, people didn't really, outside of the pagan community, which would have been small, going back a number of decades, the idea of Samhain wasn't really seen as a distinct separate festival, apart from people who knew about the cross-quarter days. But because in the Irish language, the month of November is Samhain, then, the 31st of October is obviously the eve of the month of Samhain. It is the eve of it becoming November. And so it's referred to in Irish as Iha Hauna. So I think there's been a lot of confusion about when is our ancient festival of Samhain. And that is determined, by the movement of the sun. It's basically part of the whole wheel of the year. So let's imagine our circle. Just looking to see if I have something circular here. Or if you take like a plate or something and you draw a line from top to bottom, and say at the top you have your winter solstice and at the bottom you have your summer solstice, then cross that. So you're making a quarter of that circle. And so over here you'll have your autumn equinox, and over here you'll have your spring equinox. So now you have a quartered circle. Winter solstice, summer solstice after the winter solstice, spring equinox after the summer solstice, autumn equinox. That's really straightforward. 4 cardinal points across. So like a Celtic cross, essentially a quartered circle. But we have 8 stopping points on this wheel of the year. And so the other 4 points are the cross quarter days. They are the ancient fire festivals. And so now we're going to, again, equally bisect each quarter. So let's take our winter solstice to spring equinox quarter. And we're going to draw a line right down through the exact middle of that. So you can do this on a piece of paper, while you're listening, if you want to just get it really clear. So exact middle of that quarter to the exact middle of the opposite quarter. And that gives you a line between Imbolc and Lunasa. And then if you take the next quarter, and again you draw an exact line, now you're going to have your other points, which is trying to think the way we're coming around, which is Bealtaine to Samhain. So there's your 8 points. So winter solstice, the peak of light, big solar festival, really important. We have our Bruanshi and Brunabonia, Newgrange, aligned for that sunrise on that day of the winter solstice, which also is movable. You need to look up, for each year when the sun is exactly at that point, because it's not always the 21st. And then we come to our Imbolc, which will be early February. And then we come to our spring equinox. Now, how you calculate where that Imbolc festival will fall, the cross-quarter day, just look at your calendar, count your days between the winter solstice and the autumn equinox, which are very easy to search. And exactly halfway, in those number of days, that's where your Imbolc will fall. So now you're taking your spring equinox and your summer solstice. And again, you can search what dates those are, how many days between, exactly halfway between that number of days, you are going to have, where are we? Spring equinox. We're going to have our Bealtaine. And that on the other end of that spoke, so think of it like spokes of a wheel, on the other end of that will be Samhain, which comes after the autumn equinox. So once we've done those, well, that gives us the other ends of the spokes of the wheel. So now we come around to our, after our Bealtaine, we come around to our summer solstice, and then between our summer solstice and our autumn equinox, we've already done that spoke of the wheel, so we know that at the other end of that is Lunasa. And then we come up into our final quarter after the autumn equinox is where we've got our Samhain here coming through from our Bealtaine, and then after our Samhain comes our winter solstice, and then the wheel continues around. So there are debates about when is the beginning of that cycle. I mean, it's a whole cycle anyway. Do we know, did our ancestors think of, when is New Year? Did they think in years at all? Or did they just think in, this is the whole cycle of the agricultural year? There are times when we, when we draw in to shelter around the fire. There are times when we hunt. There are times when we plant. There are times when we plough. There are times when we harvest, and so on. So I don't know how helpful it is to think of Celtic New Year, but essentially those points along the year are when our ancestors would have known what to do in terms of the whole agricultural year. So I feel a very strong argument for saying the wheel begins at Samhain. We go into the dark, retreat into the darkness, and in that darkness we're preparing for the peak of the light to return. We are preparing for, at Imbolc, the little green shoots, new life, new growths, animal life, plant life to emerge again. I do know there are people who see Imbolc as the beginning of the cycle because that is when the new life appears. And then there are people who would say, well, winter solstice, the peak of light, that's the beginning of the cycle. I think the fact that a lot of the festivals are celebrated on the eve in the darkness, that idea of going into the dark and waiting for the rising of the sun to come the next morning, which is something we will do, on all the festivals, kind of greet the sunrise, is significant. But I also think that idea that all life kind of emerges out of those processes in the dark, if we think of, human and sort of mammalian life, it begins in the dark of the womb and then emerges into the light. So the peak of light is like during the birth process, when the birth canal opens and the light, that's the first time the light kind of comes in, or the light is seen. And then the emergence out into the world, into the light. Plant life beginning in the dark under the earth, and then, emerging out at Imbolc. So I don't think we should get too hung up on those things, but I think we do need to kind of be aware of the difference between the two celebrations of Halloween and Samhain. That is, as pagan practitioners. So Halloween is something I absolutely engage in, and the family engages in, and from when the kids were small, from when I was a kid myself, dressing up. Guising was part of folk tradition. Going around the houses, getting donations of food. Like when I was a small child, we did not use the term trick or treat. That was very American. It wasn't something that we used there, but we did, go around and gather up sweets and dress up and all of that. The trick or treat term kind of became, I suppose, more popular with exposure to American films and so on. And the whole kind of Halloween consumerism, commodification, as opposed to just being a folk celebration, being a kind of big commercial event as it is now, I think is kind of an importation from American culture. So like those in generations before us, especially those who emigrated from here and from Scotland, brought this notion of the festival honouring the dead over, to the States or Canada or Australia or wherever they emigrated to. It caught on, and then kind of got exported, repackaged, rebranded, and brought back to us. So carrying on the folk traditions, I think, is important, and to be aware that there's a living tradition is important. So Halloween is part of that, but it is very much a Christian festival. So, it's kind of ironic in a way that pagans, witches, Wiccans are kind of, very attached to the date of 31st of October because it is the Christianized version. Samhain, as we've discussed, is a cross-quarter day. It's one of the great fire festivals, one of the 4 great fire festivals that fit in, that segment those quarters divided by the solstices and equinoxes. So this year, Samhain will be on the 7th of November. And that is when I will have my ceremony with family. We'll light a fire in the garden. Hopefully it won't be too wet, but we'll do it one way or another. And that is when we will remember the deep ancestors, when we'll do our intentions for what we want to allow to grow, allow to prepare, allow to germinate in the dark of the year. So for our ancestors, this was a time of huge feasting, but you have to think about, how society would have been organized at the time. And it wouldn't have been possible to bring all the livestock and feed them all going into the dark of the year, into the harsh weather of winter. So the animals, that weren't going to make it through the winter would have been slaughtered, and that would have been the meat for a great feast, And I personally don't eat meat, haven't done since 1986. But, that is the feasting aspect of it. So I think to apply that into our modern times, sort of emotionally, psychologically, what does that mean? How do we work with the energy of this festival? It's really a time for letting go. And that kind of fits with the death and darkness theme as well. For me, everything on this work is about stepping into sovereignty. It's about aligning ourselves with the powers and sacred energy in the land. It's about being the most authentic version of ourselves we can be. That's always about letting go. That's always about stripping off the layers. And we think of on Maureen, the Morrigan, the triplicity there. And the great queen who takes the form of crow or raven. Well, let's think about what they do in nature. And they strip away decay. They strip away decaying flesh from carcasses, from dead animals in the fields. And imagine if they didn't, So it's the idea of stripping down what is not really viable, what's not really sustaining. So like the decaying flesh on the carcasses of dead animals, to strip away that decay, to strip away anything that's toxic, to strip away anything that's superfluous and not serving a positive purpose for us at this time. That's the work of this time of year. And just like crows and ravens will strip that carcass down to the bone, it's about coming down to the bones of ourselves, what's really at the core, so that what we prepare in the dark of winter, what we allow to germinate, what we allow to grow, will be of real benefit to us as that peak of light comes and we move towards the season of new life at Imbolc. So it's, a good idea to think about, what do I not want to carry through the winter, emotionally, psychologically, materially as well. What do I need to let go of now? And what is it that I really want to promote the growth of? And what will assist that? So maybe it's a time for gathering with family around the fireside. Maybe it's a time for reading and retelling old stories. Maybe it's a time for really to get to know our mythology. Maybe it's a time for being out in winter nature, seeing what is still full of life, the potential that's coming, because it's all a process. We see the autumn leaves that kind of fall from the trees. They fall and they decompose and they add to the richness of the soil so that growth can happen. So there's always this cycle of life, this cycle of energy ongoing. And it is, of course, very much a time for remembering those who've gone before us. For me in particular, that's my dad who passed on 8 years ago. But there are also just a number of friends and friends of the family. I don't think I've ever been at as many funerals in 1 year as I have this year. So that's been quite striking. And so in keeping with the Halloween traditions, like last night, I remembered our Christian departed, because for my dad, that's what he was. He was a devout Catholic. He was very committed to his faith. So we lit a candle in front of his picture, which always stands on a table in my sort of heart of the house, the hallway, and other ancestors and friends who've passed on, their photographs are on there as well. So we poured a glass of his favourite red wine and we raised a toast to him, and we named all those who we've lost this year, and we lit for the first time this year the stove, the hearth fire that is in the heart of the house. But my key celebration will be on the 7th of November for Samhain. But also last night, we made a celebration dinner and put some out for the ancestors and poured a glass of wine. And that then is given in offering today to the land and to the spirits. So however you choose, whether you're someone who kind of absolutely loves Halloween, which I do, whether you're dyed in the wool and go, no, I won't be celebrating anything till the 7th of November for real Samhain, which is when it is, or whether, like me, you'll kind of blend the two together and see it as a whole season. I wish you blessings at this time as we enter the dark of the year. I wish you comfort if you're grieving from a recent bereavement. I wish you strength and resilience through the winter. And I wish you the clarity to know what it is you need to let go of and to invite the preparation for the new into your life. And there is a toast my dad has, and I don't have a glass of wine here because it's still morning, but it's a lovely toast that he passed on to us, which is Gomer mi bio ag an amseo a ríis, sláinte chun na bhar is go maran na maná go jo. And that translated is, may we all be alive this time next year. Health to the men. And my favourite bit, may the women live forever. So, gra agus banachtaí díobh go léir. Love and blessings to you all, and sláinte go fóill. So, goodbye for now.